Afternoon. So it is the end of October. It's not. It is the end of November, almost.
First try.
And as such, I'm here to tell you what I've read this month. It's been pretty stacked, considering how it was in October. I've read 6 books so far this month. Potentially have plans to do a 7th, but at the moment, no. I've taken a break for a few days. I haven't read in a while.
We were on a break.
The first book that I read in November, I started in October. I just hadn't got around to finishing. This is Percival Everett's James. This was the Booker Prize shortlisted, and I think should have won.
Actually,
I was really captivated by this book. James is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, which is Mark Twain's classic American novel, and it tells the story from the perspective of Jim, the slave that Huck runs away with. Having not read Huckleberry Finn, I went into this not really knowing anything about the story, except that it's considered a classic of American literature. Everett does something really interesting, which is that he puts a completely contemporary take on it. It highlights the absurdity of the racism in these old stories, and the story of James itself is tragic, it's powerful, it's really funny, but in a very dark way.
Well, humor is interesting because if I can disarm a reader with humor, then I can address serious stuff.
It's a really clever book, and I highly recommend it for people who have an interest in exploring literature from Black authors.
Let's see what the Wokies are up to.
Or from people who haven't read Huckleberry Finn, or who have, but want to see a new take on it. The next book I read in November was William S. Burroughs' Queer. So I'd seen the film for Queer, which is directed by Luca Guadagnino and stars Daniel Craig, Drew Starkey, Jason Schwartzman, etc. And I really liked the film. I thought it was very interesting. However, I was curious to see how Burroughs had originally written it. And I was really engaged with a lot of what Burroughs is doing here. I think that his writing doesn't always win me over. However, there are certain moments when he talks about longing or the certain desire to reach out and just have that contact that was at the time repressed is beautifully explored.
I'm currently descending hundreds of feet into a cave.
One of my favorite moments in the film, which I talked about in my video, Guadagnino evoked a sort of phantasmic vision of Daniel Craig to reach out and touch Drew Starkey's character. And Burroughs actually wrote about it explicitly in the book. And the way that he wrote about it was exactly how it was evoked on screen. And it was amazing to me that Guadagnino hadn't actually done that himself, because it just seems such a filmic thing to do.
A writer, I think, is seeing a film. At least I'm seeing a film when I write, and then I try to get that film across to the reader.
Queer tells the story of William Lee, which is basically Burroughs' alter ego in his books, and his love and yearning and sort of rejection from a man called Allerton. That is his name, I'm sure of it.
Yes, sir, boss.
And also his yearning for this drug called ayahuasca. That's it, ayahuasca.
Smoking a foul doobie.
This seemingly telepathic plant that induces telekinesis in those who consume it. There's obvious parallels between the desire to be in someone's mind, the desire to know what someone is thinking, or the relationship between them. It's obviously about that. I think I prefer the film. However, there are some really great passages in Queer. And as the story itself, it's really well written. It's very easy to get through. If you're a fan of Burroughs and you haven't read this, I recommend. If you're curious about reading Burroughs' work, I think this is interesting. I was curious because I remember at the time, Queer was seen as really quite a bold novel in terms of its portrayal of homosexuality.
Nice cock.
It's really quite tame in terms of what it does. It's very much a situation of implying. There's nothing too gratuitous in here. The third book that I read in November was Charles Bukowski's Post Office. I am an absolute sucker for Bukowski. I love his work. I'm kind of a simp for him, really. His writing very often, when he gets in a rhythm, really hits on some universal human truth, and that only he could say it the way he does. Post Office tells of his time as a postal worker, this 12-year period in which he worked in the post office. In typical Bukowski fashion, it's very funny, it's very crude, there's a lot of sex, a lot of booze, a lot of smoking, all these sort of things. And then also there is the ridiculousness and the absurdity of his home life and his relationships with women. Crazy to me that he had the gall to write something like this. He's really a very uncompromisingly honest writer, which is respectable, but also kind of risky if you're that kind of guy. I enjoy it. I don't think it's his best book. I think it is important in the context of his wider body of work. The fourth book I read in November Scott Hymes's Mysterious Skin. This was adapted into a film in 2004, I believe, by Greg Araki, who made The Doom Generation and Nowhere. Very sort of indie rebellious movies in the 90s, and he's continued to make films to this day. Anyway, back to the book. Mysterious Skin is told through varying perspectives, but two of the main perspectives that you'll get are Neil and Brian. Neil was abused by his baseball coach as a young man.
That escalated quickly.
As we continue the story, we realize the effect that this has had on him. And Brian suffered a traumatic event. However, he doesn't know what that event was, and neither do we until it's revealed over time. But he believes he was abducted by aliens, and the whole story is his sort of quest seeking the truth as to what happened to him. It's told over a number of years, and it's really, really good, really brilliantly written, absolutely gorgeous prose. It's terribly uncomfortable to read. You can lose yourself in this world. You will not like it. Certain acts of abuse that happen to characters are horribly vivid and just painful to sit through. I would recommend it to people who have the stomach for it. The next two books both took me a day to read, which for me is pretty damn good. This first one is Philip Roth's The Dying Animal. So The Dying Animal is about a cultural critic who works for NPR, who has also had time as an academic professor and has a penchant for sleeping with his students. Reading this was a really interesting experience because it felt like a monologue. Like the whole way through is essentially a retelling of what has happened to this character. The story itself, at first, seems interesting, innocent, kind of dark considering the subject matter. It gets so much darker. By the end of this story, Jesus, the amount of morbidity in this book is horrendous. Some of the scenes in them themselves, I was just thinking, what on earth? To read some of the things that he'd written in this book and the way he'd written them. The latter, let's say 30 pages of this book are extraordinary. It's really a sort of unfolding of a character's psyche, and it's absolutely fascinating to read. I'll definitely be reading more Philip Roth. You'll likely see him in a later video. I also am really curious. I was looking into his bibliography. He has a book called The Breast. It feels like a riff on The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, in which a man turns into a breast and is philosophizing about his desire for people to touch him, to fondle him.
Be on the lookout for a large female breast.
It's about a 4,000 with an X cut.
I think it's brilliant that you can be a prestigious author and write that. And the final book that I read in November, as of now, bear with me on this because I will explain myself. This is Lynn Painter's The Love Wager.
Oh man, am I a woman?
If you've seen my most recent video, which is reading romance books for the first time, you can watch that there, then you will know the reason why I'm reading this. I'm doing it because I want to write a novel, and my novel is a satirical romance. So I want to know the tropes. I want to know exactly what it is that makes these novels tick, at least to the people that read them. And I decided I'd start with this just because I thought it was short, bearable, and very trope heavy. And it was. In terms of the content itself, it's just not my style of writing. I'm not really a romance guy. In terms of books, anyway, I'm obviously a real romantic in real life. The plot itself follows Hallie Piper, who meets a guy as she's bartending at a wedding. It's the bride's brother. And over the course of the book, they develop a relationship. And it's based on a bet that the two of them make over which one of them can get into a relationship first. Coincidentally, they fall in love with each other. You'd never guess. Was it all right? Yeah, it's okay. It's not brilliant, but it was easy to read. It did give me some exposure to tropes, and I appreciate that. That's what I've read in November. I think I'm going to try and read something else before the month is out, but we'll see. So for now, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. And I will see you in my next video, which is going to be my TBR, when I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to be reading in December. So yeah, see ya.